Hey horror fans, welcome back to Real Talk Horror. I am your host, Josh Bell, and you're tuning in to one of our mini episodes, a little dose of movie mayhem where I break down a film that I've just recently watched in usually about 5 to 7 minutes. Today's entry is a wild one, let me tell you. We're diving into a little known, truly outrageous flick from the early 90s called Little Devils, The Birth. Now, this one isn't exactly a blockbuster or a horror classic. Instead, it's what we might call hidden treasure for fans of so bad it's good horror. I first learned about Little Devils from one of my favorite horror YouTubers, at Benny's Bloody Bits, who spotlighted it as a cult gem. We were talking about Mark Price, or Skippy, from Family Ties, and he brought this one up. And of course, after hearing Talk It Up, I was curious, so I went on a deep dive into YouTube's video caverns, and after some searching, finally struck gold and I found it. And wow, was I in for a ride. Alright, so Little Devils, The Birth is best described as a horror comedy. That is, at its core, as chaotic as it sounds. The plot centers on Ed, a down-on-his-luck artist who's trying to make a name for himself, but ends up with something much worse than a creative block. Through a bizarre series of events, he gets his hands on some strange serum, and what does he do with it? Well, he accidentally spawns these weird demon-like creatures, the Little Devils, as the title suggests, that start causing absolute mayhem. Directed by George Pavlo, the film stars Russ Tamblyn, who some of you might recognize from musicals like West Side Story, or like myself from his role in Twin Peaks. Seeing him here is a bit like seeing a veteran actor wander into an amateur improv class. It's delightful and surreal all at once. The Little Devils themselves are brought to life with a mix of puppetry and stop motion effects, which does not look realistic. But hey, that's part of the charm here. It's a movie that embraces its limitations, which makes it strangely endearing. When I pressed play, I'll be honest, I didn't quite know what to expect. I figured I'd get a cheesy horror comedy. But even my wildest expectations didn't quite prepare me for the level of camp I was in for. From the get-go, Little Devils has this wonderfully chaotic energy that feels straight out of the 80s or 90s B-movie scene. Imagine the demonic puppets from Gremlins crossed with the offbeat humor of Ghoulies, but somehow even lower budget and more bizarre than Ghoulies. My first reaction? A mix of shock and laughter. Part of me thought, what on earth am I watching? But the other part was totally along for the ride. It's one of those rare films where you know it's objectively not good, but you're hooked anyway. There's something about how unapologetically weird and messy it is that makes it fun, and in a way even charming. I expected cheap effects and overacting, but I was surprised by how sincerely it committed itself to its absurd premise. Alright, so let's get into the highlights, and let's be fair, some of the drawbacks. First up, there's the true stars of the show, the Little Devils. These aren't high-tech animatronics or CGI monstrosities. They're puppets, wildly goofy, kinda creepy, and definitely very amateur. But in the best way possible. There's something so lovable about how low budget they look. They move in jerky, awkward motions that somehow add to their personality. It's clear that the filmmakers didn't have the resources for high-quality monsters, but they made do with what they had, and they had fun with it. Then there's Russ Tamblyn. The man is an icon in his own right, and seeing him here is like watching a Shakespearean actor suddenly show up in a college skit. He plays a quirky character with absolute commitment and delivers lines with a kind of serious intensity that's totally at odds with the ridiculous plot. He elevates every scene he's in, and you can tell he's enjoying himself. Tamblyn's presence adds a little bit of class to the madness, and it's clear he's not phoning it in. He's giving it his all, and he makes it 10 times better. On the downside, though, the pacing definitely could be better. There are parts where it feels like the movie is stretching to fill time, and some scenes go on way longer than necessary. The plot, such as it is, doesn't make a ton of sense. It's full of holes and confusing moments that never really get resolved. And the acting, well, let's just say that Tamblyn and Price are in a class of their own compared to the rest of the cast. But honestly, if you're here for stellar acting, this is not the movie for you. It's rough around the edges, but in the best possible way. So for the final verdict, for a traditional critical rating, I'd have to give Little Devils the Birth a 3 out of 10. Objectively, it's not well made. The effects are cheap, the acting inconsistent, and the plot is barely there. But here's the thing, I don't think anyone who watches this movie is looking for a masterpiece. For its sheer entertainment value, though, I'm giving it a cheesy rating of 7 out of 10. This is a movie for fans who can appreciate a film that's so bad, it actually comes around to being good again. The kind of movie you put on with friends to laugh, cringe, and have a blast with. If you enjoy B-movies that embrace their own absurdity, Little Devils absolutely delivers on that front. So that's going to be a wrap here with Little Devils the Birth. Huge shout out again to @Benny's Bloody Bits for putting this one on my radar. It's films like this that remind us that horror doesn't always have to be slick or polished. It can be weird, messy, and a total blast. If you want to see this oddball for yourself, go hunting on YouTube like I did and you might just stumble across it. And thanks for tuning into this mini episode of Real Talk Horror. If you enjoyed this one, stay tuned because we've got some more big reviews coming up on the main show. Until then, hey, stay creepy and have fun.